This is Art 490, Baroque art. We finished the Italian and Flemish sections of this course in the first half. Now we're starting the second half with the Dutch. The 1600s are called the Golden Age of Dutch art, and there's three towering figures: um, Frans Hals, Rembrandt, and Vermeer. One of the things that all three of those have in common is that they have characteristics that originate with Caravaggio, and but none of those are the kinds of artists like we've seen before with Rubens and Velázquez, who actually traveled to Italy and studied and picked up the art styles from those different regions. They didn't do that. They all stayed in Holland, and uh, the way they acquired their Caravaggio characteristics are from artists who did. And we're going to start with this artist whose name Henrik ter Brugghen. He was a Dutch artist. He was one of the earlier ones, and he actually did go to Italy and to Rome and studied Caravaggio paintings. And if you look at this work of Saint Sebastian, you can see that it has some sort of Caravaggio characteristics. But I'm going to start with another one that, if you look at it a moment, you'll recognize it as being very similar to Caravaggio, but also it has a different flavor to it. This is called the Supper at Emmaus, and it's a work similar to a painting that Caravaggio did. Here's the Supper at Emmaus by Caravaggio, and he also did another one that we had on our list that was similar, though this is a later, darker one. And I chose it to show that when a Dutch painter goes to Rome to study Caravaggio, he doesn't just copy exactly a Caravaggio style. It's like he looks at it through the filter of Dutch art. So this is a Supper at Emmaus, and you look at the figures, and it has a similar sort of composition. The figure about to stand up here, like this one, arms on the table here. I think in the other Supper at Emmaus, the figure on this side has the arms on the table, about to stand up. But they're in surprise, and Christ is here in the middle, and it looks similar, but not exactly like the Christ. This Christ is a more idealized Italian-looking Christ with a Italianate kind of gesture, and this is pure Caravaggio with a very dark background and spotlight coming and illuminating all the figures, and all those characteristics we learned from Caravaggio. This has, and when you see it through the eyes of the Dutch interpretation, the Dutch artist has changed some things. One of the is the faces. If you look at the face of Christ here, and the face, especially this face here, they don't look like Italian faces. They look more like Dutch faces, like Northern European faces. So it's a different quality. If you think of him as an artist idealizing a face to some extent, different cultures have different ideals as what is the ideal face, or what if you want to use as what is the typical face. So in Italy, they're going to use something more along these lines. I mean, this face ultimately goes back to the face of Jesus from a statue by Verrocchio from the 1400s. But these other faces, they just have this Mediterranean look to them more so than these faces. Apart from that, there's a kind of an awkwardness to, say, the gestures, the positions of the hands in relationship to one another. So that this is an artist obviously who's not as great as Caravaggio, but he does have this distinction in that he goes to Rome, picks up the Caravaggio characteristics, and brings them back home, and the kinds of paintings that he and other Dutch artists make at the time are going to have a huge influence to the art in Holland during the golden age of the main figures that we're going to be talking about. All right, this is ter Brugghen's one that we have on our list is called Saint Sebastian. And first of all, if you've ever seen images of Saint Sebastian from, say, the 1400s or 1500s, it's usually just a standing figure of a nude male or a draped male tied to a tree, and he's got arrows in him. And it's often the opportunity to represent just a male figure, just an idealized male figure in many Italian paintings. And uh, putting arrows in it, makes it attributable to Saint Sebastian. But otherwise, it's just an opportunity to demonstrate that the artist can represent a male nude, essentially. But after the Reformation and the Counter Reformation, that sort of thing was not the best use of a painter's time. So instead, this version of the story where apparently after the Sebastian had been shot with arrows against a tree, he wasn't quite dead, and that a woman named Irene came and untied him from the tree and nursed him back to health. And I think he was later martyred, but the event of him being pierced by arrows was the subject of earlier pictures. Now it's the rescue of Saint Sebastian, I guess you could say, that is now the subject, because this would be the sort of picture that you would have in a church, say, or where there's a hospital where people go and they're recovering from plague or some other thing, and they would look to Saint Sebastian as an example of somebody who suffered, and that seeing them being nursed back to health, or at least being rescued, is a way to identify with what's going on in the picture, if you happen to be someone who's suffering similarly, or at least in any other way, so that you can see someone who suffered a great deal. So that's the sort of the rationale behind this picture. But when you look at it, the composition is Baroque. It's based on diagonals rather than some sort of symmetry, and like when you think of, say, high Renaissance symmetry, where you got everything collected in the middle and then a pyramid of some kind, or a triangle that it is stable. Here, like the same sort of things that Caravaggio would do, like St. Paul or St. Peter upside down, where you have diagonals going back into space. This strong diagonal that goes from corner to corner is a very awkward sort of composition compared to the idealized composition from the previous era. But this is obviously Baroque. The fact that it has a dark background with a strong theatrical spotlight on the figures is also a Baroque characteristic. And when you look at the way the rendering of the figure, the smoothed out brushstrokes, this is very much like Caravaggio. If you think of the figures that are in his paintings, especially the ones like St. Paul or St. Peter crucified upside down, or several of the others, where the flesh of the figures are, all the brushstrokes are smoothed out into one, solid forms of the figure, and then a large degree of realism. Like look at, say, the foot, and all the way the tonality of every toe and toenail, and the strong foreshortening of the foot. All these things would have come from Caravaggio. The realism, the having a bright color and with lots of detail is also a Caravaggio thing. So when we come to the other figures, the other artists, you'll see that they got their Caravaggio characteristics not directly from Caravaggio or seeing any actual Caravaggio painting, but by seeing paintings like this, or like this. I mean, Rembrandt will do a lot of religious pictures that are dark and have this sort of feature to them. And and we'll see those later. But for now, let's just use him, Ted Brugghen, as the as the example of how the Caravaggio look came to Holland. All right, the first artist of the big three is Frans Hals, and we learned about him in the original survey. Let's look again. Frans Hals is known for uh, almost entirely portraits, and some of his portraits are single figures, and others are groups. This is an example of the group of militia officers. Um, this was a popular sort of uh, painting genre. Let me show you here. This is the way group pictures of these militia companies were painted before Hals. They would be like class portraits, where they just a whole bunch of heads, and they would, each one is, um, sort of crudely done. I mean, it's very awkward. It's just like the artist needed to paint a large group of people, and he looked at each one and drew them, so that you could tell, I guess, or that each person could tell which one is him, and that's about it. When Hals came along, he added another dimension to it. He made it so that everybody is an individual. Everybody is seen as a live, living, thinking, breathing person, and each has his own personality and its own facial features that are recognizable. And there's just a huge variety and complexity to the picture. Liveliness too. Just there's joviality. They're all a bunch of friends. These military companies would be um, a kind of a club that people belong to. In the past, these clubs had been actual military companies, like a militia, where sort of like the Minutemen in early American history. The people who, when a war would be, people would be called to war, they would go and see. I'm not seeing the whole picture there. When people would go to war, they would this company would come together, and this would be the officers, and they would get all the people who were sort of like a volunteer army, and they did lots of military deeds in the past. But in the 1600s, those days were kind of over, and now the companies were more like social clubs, and they would get together every year and have a banquet of some sort, and pay somebody to have their picture made. And this would be the kind of picture that you would typically see, just like a school portrait with rows of people. Um, this would be done by a less than great artist. But when Hals came along, he would study the people and understand their personalities, and put together a picture that where everybody is in some sort of social arrangement and related to one another. Lots of interesting eye contact, like this one's looking directly out at us, and he has a interesting expression on his face. Um, just jovial. Also, this smile is like a fleeting expression, and all the gestures that you see, like this man here, he's standing here, he's looking over towards people on the right, as if showing his glasses up. His glass is empty, and he needs his refill. And so this quick gesture of his eyes, the glance, um, the what looks like laughter and movement, and people looking towards another. Look at this guy, his eyes looking over this way. Hand gestures. This person is offering something to somebody. This one's looking out, making this gesture with his fingers here. This one is looking here with having his hand on his chest, as if he's speaking to him. All of these things are fleeting, like catching a moment in time, as far from the idealism of previous generations of artists would make. One reason for that is that um, it wouldn't be appropriate here for an ideal kind of portrait, because uh, these are not royalty. They're sort of middle class to upper middle class people who are, dressed up in finery for a day to celebrate this occasion, this banquet. As it happened, these officers were, I think they were signed up for 3 years, and their 3 years were ending, and to celebrate, their service, they commissioned this portrait, and and they're shown banqueting, having a good time, and all of this is very jovial and informal. So it wouldn't be appropriate for them to be arranged in rows, or to have a hierarchy, or to have um, a pyramidal composition. All these diagonals and gestures and movement are the kind of things that are appropriate to this kind of thing. And it was this situation, and that um, Hals was particularly good at, not just in making an interesting composition. Here's the whole composition here. Here you can see kind of what it looks like from its size, what it looks like in a museum. But all the individuals, each one would have paid some part of the commission fee to have their picture made in the picture, um, have their portrait made, uh, and that it's a group effort, and so everybody has to, you have to see everybody's face, you have to have everybody look interesting, everybody has to be, I guess, given their position of prominence according to their rank within the group. So Hals was hugely adept at that, but he was also adept at a certain kind of painting style. We'll see more examples of it later when we have a higher resolution image of a Hals, but you can see a bit here that the painting is just a bunch of quick strokes of paint that are just like this. It looks very sketchy up close. And that's very strange, because most of everything that we've seen so far has been highly polished. This would not be a characteristic of Caravaggio. Caravaggio's characteristic this has is the realism, which is very strong. I mean, all the textures, the patterns in cloth, the folds of cloth, the way light plays over surfaces are all Caravaggio kind of characteristics. And the fact that they're real people behaving like real people, that that um, the Caravaggio did that sort of thing. Except one thing that Caravaggio didn't ever do is have a jovial atmosphere. Nothing that he did was ever fun. It was all serious, or at least most of his later things. So where did this come from? Well, I mean. Uh, Rubens would be a source for this kind of thing. Rubens and and uh, and the Flemish artist also had a kind of an unseriousness to them. I guess that ultimately goes back to the pageantry of the Venetians, and also their technique of painting, where the color is broken up more, and it's more about color and an eye candy look. Where it's just splendor and pomp. So combining that Caravaggio feature of realism with the Venetian characteristics of the broken color and emphasis on color and uh, informality and pageantry, um, put together this in the hands of Hals, who, as we're going to see shortly, was just a master at this, putting these little brushstrokes that looked like so much like sketches up close, that resolve into very real textures and almost photographic accuracy of drawing. Uh, he was just a master at that, and one can see that how he became, uh, his status as an artist increased tremendously in a couple of centuries after this, when uh, when the Impressionists saw it. They sort of woke up to how wonderful these things were. though at the time, he was famous in his lifetime, but he lived a long time, and by the time he got old, this was out of style, and he died in poverty. And his much of his art was just forgotten for those 200 years, from the end of the 1600s to close to the end of the 1800s. In the 1800s, there was a revival of the Dutch Golden Age, of the 1600s, because of largely because of this broken color. Let's look at another example of something that what I'm talking about in terms of his brushstrokes. Here. This is not one of that's on your list, but in addition to portraits, the formal portraits of a bunch of military people, he also did tavern pictures of people being jovial, revelring, but this is what the kind of things I'm talking about. Look at this patch of color here. There's just lots of little patches of color that, when you look at them up close, it looks really, really sketchy. If you remember that Rubens that I showed you, it was a study that he did. Also has a similar sort of thing, but Hals is even more so broken up into little bitty pieces, similar to what the Impressionists were doing. In fact, it looks like an Impressionist kind of painting up close. But when you step back, things resolve into almost a photographic degree of realism. Now, again, the photographic degree of realism Caravaggio would have, but when you look up close to a Caravaggio, you don't see the broken up strokes like this. That only occurs in the Hals when you look really close and you see all the individual brushstrokes like this. Or let's look at the sleeve on this side. This is like some sort of silk that has almost a silvery reflection to it, and it resolves there. It looks like that's that kind of silk, but up close, I mean, these looks like wild brushstrokes that don't, if all you saw this was up close like this, you would not imagine that at a distance it would resolve into what you could think of as photographic realism. Here, by the way, is his initials, Frans Hals. Okay, so when we go back and just take a step back, so he also did other militia portraits, and just to show you some more like the ones that we just looked at. There's this one, and here's another one. So he would give variety to this a group of people in a picture, so that there aren't just a bunch of heads, in a row. One other aspect of this is just the interesting composition. There's these long diagonals and interesting interplay of one shape leading to another shape throughout the whole picture that is, ties everybody into one essential fabric, which is interesting. But the other works that we're going to look at are, like, here's one example. I want to show you the brushstrokes again. I mean, this seems unbelievable compared to, say, a Caravaggio or any artist prior to this. Even El Greco, for example, from the previous generation in the 1500s, who had loose brush strokes, and it was painterly technique. There was nothing like this degree of sort of choppiness and sketchiness. And when you see this, it's almost as if this were a study, not the real work. Because he leaves these. You could imagine taking a feathering brush and going over this and smoothing it all out so that it's all one solid form. Like, for example, this. But he doesn't do that. That's his That's Hals's particular style. And it was just popular just for some, few decades in the the first part up into the maybe the middle or so of the 1600s, and then it went out of fashion. Here's one that's on your list. It's called Male Baba. I mean, Mali meaning crazy, uh, crazy person. Is a woman in a tavern, and as I said, he did lots of tavern pictures where people are engaged in revelry, and he would make portrait types of certain people. This one happens to be a specific person who is identified by on the back as by name. Named Babe is a diminutive of Barbara, I think, and it was a local person who was known, and she was um, apparently a drinker in a tavern. But this kind of portrait, where it's just filled with action and the and expression, a really fleeting expression, and you can see the psychological portrait aspect, where you can just see I mean, you can see that looked like a crazy lady, but this expression on her face is something that would only have occurred in a split second. It's not something that in formal portraits a person uh, sits for the artist and has to hold an expression for a long time, so they can't smile, or they can't do anything that they can't hold for forever. While the artist, painstakingly copies every little feature. But this, how do you do this, where someone is is making an expression that just happens for a moment and is gone? How does an artist do that? I mean, way is that he works very very quickly. Look at this sketchiness of the paint here. It's even more sketchy than before. I think the owl has to do with the uh, uh, it means being drunk. It's like when you say drunk is a skunk, but in Dutch it's drunk as an owl for some reason. You read this medal of the pewter stein that she's holding. From a distance, you look back. This looks like a photograph of that metal. It looks exactly the way light plays over the surface of this metal. So, this goes back to, I don't know how long. I mean, when if you think of the Marodi altarpiece and that uh, that copper kettle that's on the hearth from 1425, they had down the in the northern artists the ability to render metals and render different materials, um, in a kind of a photographic look. But this, when you look up close, is just a bunch of splashes of color up close, and which is where the painter is seeing it. How he's able to make this resolve into the kind of photographic look. I don't know how. Look at all these sketchy lines, and they have the effect of making her look alive and moving, uh, and breathing, and as a living soul, rather than just an object in a room with a light on it. Here's another example of the fleeting gesture. Um, here's one that's on your list, called the Merry Drinker, I believe. Let me check one thing. Yes, Merry Drinker. I think it's also called Jolly Topper. Uh, these are the ones that are on your list here. Um, Again, I just got this because it's such a wonderful design. This black hat, this oval here. It looks like a 20th century abstract painting. That has this. I think Gottlieb has a painting that looks like this, that's abstract. Um, the 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 energy in all of the marks. Let's look up close. The energy in all these marks are just unbelievable. All these little things, little dry brush technique bits, splashes. You know, it's just wonderful how they resolve into a readable texture. I mean, as a real texture, and the expression on the face. The lips are parted. You can see the teeth. The eyes are alive, and and the sketchiness just adds to that um, living quality, living person quality. It's that tipping of the glass in the water level, or the level of the ale in the glass is it looks like it's moving, or it's sloshing as he's holding it and talking to you. Like, he looks like he's really looking at you and talking to you as if he's engaged in conversation, the way you would in, say, a tavern. Here's an example. I think I have you can see all these interesting costumes that the Dutch would wear in these paintings, where they lots of embroidery, lots of silk, lots of starched linen collars and things with um, interesting interplay of light and dark that the artist has the opportunity to describe each thing. But Hals does it in such a way that um, it looks almost like a mess up close, but at a distance it resolves into this. When he does his formal portraits, something not in a tavern, um, it's much more polished. But still, you can look at it when you look close. It still has the sketchiness and very quick brushstrokes, and single strokes that make the mark, that make uh, uh, the resolved detail. It's just wonderful stuff to look at. And these collars. Uh, you see, this has her age and the date as if it were a document of the person. As though it's more of a formal commission portrait rather than just making a picture of somebody in a tavern. Here's another one. This one is I believe I called it Portrait of an Elderly Lady, and the one that's on your list. I think I have this one has a very high resolution, but you can see that again it has a uh, this painterly look, but it's done so skillfully that that every brushstroke appears to wonderfully describe the forms of everything. This complex object of this collar. I don't know how you do this. And this, I guess it's some sort of black silk uh, brocade work, I guess, or some sort on her uh, on her dress, and the way light plays over it is so wonderfully described with this animated brushstroke. And also the accuracy of the forms. I mean, the 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 position of the hand, the shape. You can see the bones underneath the skin. Uh, the 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 way light plays over it. It just seems. Um, let's look at the other hand. Everything just seems right, and clear, even though it's only made up of just a few seemingly simple brushstrokes. Apparently, that was his particular genius of rendering. Lots of these that have just the plain background and the figure against it, as simple as they could be. Um, Here's another one that's is a famous one called The Laughing Cavalier. though he's not exactly laughing, he does have an interesting expression on his face. He's just smiling or staring at you in a haughty manner, in his Van Dyke mustache and beard are creating what looks like a kind of amplifying his smile. But look at that. Okay, so that's Frans Hals. So he will be the first of the three big ones. But I have, before we get to Rembrandt, which will be in the next video, there's one more artist I want to talk about. Her name is uh, Judith Leyster. And she was somebody who is similar to Hals. That is, she worked at the same time. She knew him. They had some, I think she sued him for something at one point. But she did the similar sort of genre paintings of regular people, like tavern sort of pictures. But she was unusually, she was a woman artist who member of the Artist Guild, but she wasn't like Artesia Gentileschi, the daughter of a painter. Uh, her 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 father was had a different profession, and so it's not know how it was that she became a painter herself, though she did marry a painter, and her her husband also painted similar sort of works to herself, and when she died, all of her paintings were attributed either to her husband or to Frans Hals, because many of her pictures are of the same quality as Frans Hals, and he was completely forgotten for 200 years. It wasn't until 1890s that she was rediscovered, and it was because someone paid a lot of money for what they thought was a Frans Hals painting, and when they cleaned it, I guess they found that her signature was on it, and they said, "Well, who's this?" There was a lawsuit involved of people not selling a picture under false pretenses, essentially, and when it was discovered that it was another person who painted like Hals, that it was worthy of investigation. So now we have an artist, a female artist, unusually, who was at the same level as Hals, and this would be what's called her demonstration work, something that she would use to get into the guild. It's a picture of her painting, uh, and it has the same sort of interesting composition. That is, diagonals and a liveliness to it, rather than formal seated portrait look that formal pictures would have, the commission pictures would have. She seems like she's happy, she's smiling, she looks living and breathing, though it seems a little artificial that she would be wearing such a collar while painting. But I guess because it's her portrait, she put that on just to show that she can do that. I suppose if she's using this as a demonstration piece to show that she can do formal portraits and that she can do this unusual lace that um, apparently all the Dutch were obsessed with at the time, that she needed to show herself wearing it. So there you have it. Her brushstrokes similar to the Hals kind of things, and you can see why. Um, you know, much of her work was attributed to um, attributed to Hals or to somebody else, because she was completely unknown and forgotten for so long. But let me show you. This would be an example of her jolly topper, a tavern picture of somebody making gestures and laughing and capturing that moment in time, but in such a way as to be you know very loose brushstrokes up close and resolving into what's more or less photographic. Uh, when you back up, and the texture of the vase here, and the way the light plays on it, and also just this expression. This looks so much like what we know today as like a snapshot, that you wonder, well, how before people saw snapshots, with photographs, how would anybody know what one would look like? How would anyone know to, pick up all the subtle characteristics of a smile, of a laugh, the way the eyes work, the way the expressions on faces, because it's not something you can hold for very long to have the painter paint. Here's another one of hers, showing the kind of Caravaggio-like lighting situation, the tenebrism. Though later we're going to see in French painting, paintings, a genre of paintings that are where things are illuminated by a candle, and this will be related to that current. Here, another sort of genre scene of a boy playing a flute with some instruments, all looking rather photographic. But looking up close, you can see the brushstroke work too. Again, this was something that they thought for a couple of hundred years that this was a Hals. Here again, dramatic lighting, tenebrism, loose brush strokes, but done by Judith Leyster instead of Hals. So here's just a quick look at the works on your list. The Sebastian by Ter Brugghen. It is the direct link to Caravaggio from Holland to Caravaggio, and he brought that character, the Caravaggio characteristic, to Holland, but not the brushstrokes that we've been talking about. That came elsewhere. I would think Rubens would be a good example of that, and Rubens got his look from the Venetians. Then we have the Hals group portrait, the officers of the Haarlem militia. Haarlem had 3 militias, and this is the one for Saint Adrian. But I just gave it the officers of the Haarlem militia title to put on your list. The Mali Baba. Live, fleeting moment, wonderful textures and gestures and movement of the brushwork. The portraiture, where you can see it, the sitters look like living, breathing people who have personalities, and they feel awake. They don't look like just objects. Even one as formal and finished as this one still has the loose brushstrokes and so economical. So wait, it's not. There's no excessive marks, just enough to render what's necessary to be rendered, and necessary to communicate what it's a picture of. And then Judith Leyster, the follower of Hals, who had her own career, but was forgotten, and then brought back. All right, that's the end of this one. Next time we'll do Rembrandt.